Am I right in thinking that the idea that, or the World Bank's forecasts that the number of people living in extreme poverty rising by 55 million, that's the first time there's been a rise in world poverty since when?
At least for the last 7 years. There's been a significant poverty reduction around the world in the last 7 years, and it's being reversed at the moment.
Right. And that's mainly through India and China growing?
Yeah.
Right. So it'd be, Mr. Mehta, interesting to hear from you a perspective from India and also from your take as an environmental lawyer. You've got good reasons to beat us up.
Thank you, Mark. Now, actually, you see that the human beings, they are never satisfied. And they always like to go full circle. And here, the full circle is that we are at the edge of extinction. We are very near to that circle, actually. If you see the climate change, the global warming, I am from India and I know what is happening, how we are destroying the Himalayas. We are destroying the whole coastal lines. And then, without thinking, because that the development of the needs of the country, and these needs, from where they have come. India was a very peace-loving country, but now we are running through that fever, and that fever to become the mighty power in 21st century. And they say that 21st century is India's 21st century. And in that when we talk about the 21st century, what we are going to have? We, in that process, we have already polluted all our rivers in the country. We have polluted the groundwater. We are finishing the Himalayas. We are making the dams after dams. And we are, in the name of the energy needs, we are destroying the whole country. Just for a few years, so that we can show to the world that we are as powerful as the other nations are. My way of thinking is that it is like a full circle. When we got independence in 1947, India was much better. At that time, we did not have all those things which we have, the consumer culture, what I'm talking about. This is so long as the economists will encourage the consumer culture in the world, we will suffer. And the consumer culture is growing each day. We are copying the Western model. And as a result of that, now in Delhi alone, we have more than 10 million vehicles alone. And India is having a population of 1.10 billion. If it has a population of 1.10 billion, if every Indian would like to have 5 cars, we will take all your cars to India now. How can we sustain that? And so, what I want to say that it is the economists, it is not the economy, the foundation of the whole building is wrong. And with the vision, the whole world model we created, that yes, this should be a beautiful world. The God has created it. But the planners, the economists, they are destroying the whole that model, that the whole prospect, the whole of making that beautiful, living in that beautiful building. So that is what this world is, a beautiful building. It is like a beautiful world, and this world we are not understanding how we can relate to, because without green economy we will never succeed. They have a tunneled view. The economists I meet, because I am doing a number of dozens and dozens of cases on environment, and I know what is happening. They have a total tunnel view, and as my friend said, that they don't want to change. They will say that yes, in principle we agree, but that in principle remains on paper only. They will not have the courage to come forward and say no to this. And this is what is happening in the whether the policy. So we need what type of? The right economists, those who have not a tunneled view, those who have a wider view of the world, that what is this world, and how the economy can succeed if we don't have the natural resources. The natural resources are limited. So if we have limited natural resources, we can't plunder them. Are we leaving something for the future generations? No. We have become, so here is a question of need and greed. So unless there is a need-based economy in the world, we will never succeed. We will never have that sustainable, what we need-based means, that sustainable development, what I call that. And the greed-based is that the way we are encouraging the materialism in the world. So now on the one hand, what is happening? That it is one thing is we feel that we are very happy. I have a beautiful house, I have a beautiful car, I have so many things. But are we fulfilled within? No, we are not. And as a result of that, what is happening? The frustration. It is going deep into the psyche. So we need two things. The economists, they should understand that if we have to see that the world should really succeed in a proper living, where not only the human beings, but all living beings, they have a right to live on this earth. So living beings, all living beings, because without other living beings, we cannot succeed. We cannot live happily. So if we have to live happily, then two things are very important. One is that we have to be very sensitive to the life for the other living beings also. So that is one. And two is that all resources in the world, they are very precious. They are limited. And these resources, we have not to squander in our lifetime. We have to preserve them, keep them. We are public trustees for all those natural resources. And those, as a public trustee, we have to leave something for the future generations. And that is what, if we go, and then I was talking that outside, so material needs, it is need-based, it should be need-based. And then within we are becoming hollow every day. And if we will not have that balance between within and outside, this economy will not succeed in the world. Thank you.
Well, I think given the range of forces I'm ranged up against here, I'm going to have to be the one who defends the camp of the economists. And Richard spoke a little bit about, I guess, kind of medieval or ancient history around shaman and witch doctors and high priests. And I want to go back to the birth of the Industrial Revolution and I guess have a little bit of a discussion with Mr. Mehta and Richard around the nature of finite resources, because it was about 200 odd years ago that Reverend Thomas Malthus produced his book and argued that resources were finite and that we would always have a worthy poor with us, and that we could never lift them above penury. And he was argued against by people like David Ricardo and so on. And one of the things about capitalism is its ability to unleash tremendous innovation and productivity and make better use of finite resources. In Australia, we feed our population with about 3% of our workforce. Feeds our entire population and feeds some people elsewhere in the world. In developing countries, it's way much more than 3%. I'm sure Khalid would know what the numbers are, and their living standards are nowhere near what ours are. So there is an issue around the ability of capitalism to generate tremendous gains for people to live a decent material standard of life. So I'd like to get some responses to that. The second one that I'd like to maybe push Richard a little bit on is, now I know there are debates taking place around the introduction of the emissions trading scheme and the extent to which that's been bound up in the current crisis, but is about the use of market-based principles coming from economics to help solve the problem of a sustainable economy, because there doesn't seem to be any other game in town. So is it right that there's no other game in town as a means of solving the problems about a sustainable economy. So the solution of the economists is to say, well, we're not charging the right amount for our resources. We need to bring in that externality, add a price on carbon, and either through carbons tax or through an emissions trading scheme, force employers and force households to alter their behaviour so that we can move towards a low carbon future and sustainable future. So it's a question around Mr. Mehta, and maybe Richard and others want to pick it up, around the notion of whether we want to lock ourselves into a zero growth kind of scenario because we've got these finite natural resources, and how you do that. And then there's the second one around the role of economic theory and economists in providing the intellectual underpinning for how you might move towards, in your phrases, a green capitalism.
Oh, sure. Well, look, I think the first thing to point out is that I agree that there's no doubt that markets and market capitalism have generated enormous opportunities. The question is, what have we done with them, and can it continue to do so? So Malthus was clearly... by the way, Malthus is... Economists are known as the dismal scientists. That's thanks to Malthus, whose forecast was that basically we were all doomed to live a life based around famine, war and early death. I've forgotten. But anyway, so he gave us a great brand.
That was Hobbes,
Malthus.
I think.
Was it? I thought it was
the
Malthus.
life of man's short.
Short, miserable. Anyway, Malthus was pretty pessimistic about where we'd get, and history suggests that he was wrong. But that doesn't mean he's wrong for infinity. I'm reminded when we look at what we're doing with the way we're squandering our natural resources, I'm again reminded from history of the Spanish Empire, which is often accused of achieving reverse alchemy. The Spanish Empire found enormous amounts of gold and turned it into stones. That is, they built these enormous cathedrals. They found more wealth than anyone in history had ever stumbled upon, stole it from people in developing countries, as you do, brought it back to Spain and wasted basically all of it. The question is not, can we solve these problems, but will we solve these problems? And unfortunately, we have taken this wonderful, the wonderful resources that are available to us, and frankly, excuse my French, we're pissing it up against the wall. Now, we don't have to do that, but in doing that, we're actually limiting our options going forward. So it's not that markets can't continue to create lots of wealth, but give yourself this little thought experiment. Imagine if, rather than handing out status through giant cars and giant houses, we took a leaf out of the military's book and gave away little medals. Little status medals. And I could look at you and say, boy, haven't you got a lot of status. There wouldn't be many resources captured in my display of status. But unfortunately, we've come up with the weirdest thing you could possibly imagine, where the only way for me to impress upon you what a powerful and important man I am is not to wear my little status medal, which the army would give out, and good on them, it's clever. Instead, I have to go squander enormous amounts of resources. So I think, could we have a society that has growth and prosperity in markets? Yes. Will we? No, I don't think we will. Because we're pursuing status through an indirect means, and that indirect means is leaving huge damage behind. As to the point about markets and tackling climate change, again, can markets help? Yes. Will they? I don't think so. Because the problem with the emissions trading scheme is if you set the target wrong, you will fail. It's called a target for a reason. It's what you're aiming for. And what we're aiming for, not just in Australia but around the world, is, according to the scientists, catastrophic. So but you've got to understand it's politicians, not economists, who set the targets. So can an emissions trading scheme, help us solve climate change? Yes. Will it? No. Because if you plug the wrong number in at the beginning, you're going to get the wrong outcome. And unfortunately, economists, again, have got blood on their hands. Gee, I'm choosing my words carefully. They've got blood on their hands because when some people put their hand up to show leadership, and say, well, I want science-based targets that will stop my kids from inheriting a disastrous future, who are the first people leading the charge to say how irresponsible it would be? Some consultant tongues for hire economists running around saying it'll do this to exports or it'll do, you know. So we use economics to justify appalling targets. It's not emissions trading that's the problem, it's the design of the scheme.
Well, what about the work of Ross Garnaut and Nicholas Stern? I mean, you know, they're not consultants in the way in which you're decrying them there.
Well, I think Nicholas Stern has covered himself in glory, and Ross Garnaut, depending on the interview, is... well, no, he's... Truly. I mean, he said some amazing things, but it's like this disconnect. I mean, he spent the first 6 months of inquiry explaining to people just how big the costs of inaction were and how small the costs of action were, and everyone was sitting back, oh, that's fantastic. Yet he's come out and supported the federal government scheme, which is incredibly timid in its ambition. So I can't reconcile the evidence that Garnaut put forward with political support for a scheme that locks us into failure.
Yeah. So the first thing is that when we talk about the developing, least developed, very frankly, this idea does not go into my head at all. Because the reason is what we call the developed world. The developed world, when 20 children, one child consumes as much as equal to 20 children in India, in US. Is this the developed model, what we talk about? And so how much? So it means that you are thinking all the time how many houses you have, how many cars you have, how many the luxury goods you have at your house. And you measure everything with that. And then you want to compare that with a least developed world where you say, oh, so poor, this person is living on $1 a day. How can it be possible? You see that, friends, those who have been to India, here when I take breakfast in the morning, it takes about $10 over here. Minimum, you know what you call that, you know. And in $10, if a person goes from here, he can have food the whole day. So how can you compare the developed and the least developed? I don't know how we are measuring the whole thing together. So the first thing is that $1 and $1.50 or $2 notion should go away, because we cannot measure those things with that in one way. Please, for God's sake, in my view, it is totally wrong. A friend, so many friends, they come from my other countries, from all over the world, they come and they work with me. And they say, MC, it is just a taxi costs 600 rupees, 600 means $15 a day. You can have for whole day. And here from one place to the other place, if you have to go, you need 25 to 30 or 40, $50. How can you measure all those things? So the first thing is that we have to remove that notion of, comparing the nations. It is like that. One person was living, and he was so peaceful, and he was living in one hut in a place, and one, a person from US, a rich tourist, went over there, and he went deep into an Indian village, and he just said, how poor that person is. He is just living in a shattered hut, the grass hut. How can it be poor? How can it be possible? He's sweating, he's doing all that, and he's just staying under the tree. So then the person got up and he said, he was a wise man, who had that deep, who was fulfilled within actually, not the outside, So he said, what do you want from me? He said, I want that to give you money so that you can buy a car. You can have a good house. You can how he asked them, okay, then what after? And then ultimately he said, then you will be very happy. He said, I am very happy here right now. I am here, the way I am living here, I am very happy. So why are you? Why should I go full circle again? I should have car, I should have a good house, I should have this, and come around and then say, oh, I am feeling happy. I am already happy, so please don't. So the point is, we should not think that the way it is like the whole world is like it is a bouquet, of flowers, different flowers. The different nations, they have a different way of life, So we should not impose over-development model on those least developing or whatever the economists tell them, We should not think in that way. Yes, as far as the growth of those countries is concerned, the people, nobody will say that they should sleep hungry. Nobody would like to say that the opportunities, employment opportunities should not increase. Everything should happen. And what I suggested to the Supreme Court when I was arguing one day in the court, a case, I said that now it is already a recession. And the recession has led to the depression of millions of people worldwide.
Just to respond to that, I think Mehta quite rightly took some of the statistics that I used to try to make my point, which is that the global financial crisis is impacting, I would argue, in an epoch-changing way in the least developed countries, so-called. And I just want to respond if I can. Of course, you're absolutely right, living costs vary enormously around the world, and $1 in Mozambique is probably the equivalent of $50 in Australia, and point very well taken. Secondly, I hope I didn't, and I would never, ever equate material poverty with spiritual poverty. You may be desperately poor, that doesn't mean you're not necessarily happy or spiritually content or doing the right thing and so on and so forth. We all know that this $1.25 a day is simply a convenient World Bank measure for working out roughly what poverty levels are, and there are different meanings to it. But none of this take away from the fundamental message, which is that the development model we've used for the last 50 years or so, the Washington Consensus, so on and so forth, hasn't worked. There is massive poverty around the world, and the financial crisis is impacting on it, I think, significantly. If you want to move away from the $1.25 indication, let me just give you some other statistics. A child born today in Burkina Faso will live for 35 years less than a child born today in Japan, life expectancy. Most girls in Africa will not get a secondary education. Almost all girls in Australia and Europe will, and so on and so forth. There are 6 million or so refugees and IDPs in Africa, huge malnutrition, millions of people dying each year from completely preventable diseases, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole range of statistics you can use, I think, you can mobilise to make the general argument.
Look, I'm struggling a bit here. How are we going to remedy these very serious situations that Khalid's talking about in developing countries without consuming resources? I mean, it seems to me that the model that we've adopted to date is that we improve people's life expectancy, which is, looking around this room, it's extremely high in Australia. We improve life expectancy by raising our living standards. So how are we going to avoid the plight that people in developing countries face and, grow sustainable economies in those countries?
Yes, I will interrupt one thing. As far as the life expectancy is concerned, in India, it was 100 years life expectancy. And not now, but 5,000 years back, it was coming. So it is sometimes, now it was 55 years. Now it has gone to up to 70 years. So I think that if you go through, so the 100 years was a normal life expectancy 5,000 years back. So we have to think in every aspect,
If we go back to the Bible, we might get to Methuselah's age.
I was going to say that there's some old people in the Bible. Look, I think that the question of how do we address life expectancy without having rampant consumer materialism, I think, is bizarre. There are countries in the world, Cuba, for example, which has been energy poor since the US put an embargo on them and the Russians stopped supplying with them cheap energy. Their life expectancy is still very good. Their health, the mortality, infant mortality is very, very low. I think, coming to this this idea that MC was talking about, the idea that in order to get rich so you can have a good health system, you must first all have a car and a giant house seems like some pretty weird intermediate steps. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but let's be clear that if we want to solve health problems, let's solve health problems.
Yes.
If we want to solve shortages of big cars problems, let's solve shortages of big cars problems.
Yes.
But let's keep the two apart. And I think, why is it that the development model is so attractive to people? Well, because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the best way to get rich is to pay people bugger all to make really pointless rubbish and then sell it for a really high price to people who are looking for status.
You're right. Yes.
So, I haven't got to the punchline yet. But the punchline is, what we need, what rich countries need from developing countries, is people to become dissatisfied with their lives so that they can stop looking after themselves with very little money, go and work in factories in horrible conditions for bugger all money, and aspire to buy the rubbish that we want to sell them. So we as colonialists have to export that development model to those people because, frankly, we make trillions on the way around. Like maybe not we. I don't. My trillions are safe. But so my point is, we want to export our bad ideas because a subset of us makes so much money out of the roundabout.
Can I thank Richard Dennis, MC Mehta and Khalid Koser, and thank you for your attention.